Welcome, class. This is Ancient Religions. This is part three of our lecture series and a bit shorter of one. We're doing this all online, virtual, through this Zoom recorded class. But we've already gone from Mesopotamia down to Babylon and talked about Sumer and Uruk and Ur, and out of that comes Abraham, and so you have these different creation myths, these flood myths. Now we make our way to Egypt, and we want to look at their religious center, their culture, and also some of their unique creation and flood myths as well. The first thing I'll mention that is not so ununique, maybe in the ancient world, but maybe unique to us, is that you have different creation myths based on different cities. You have different cities that emphasize one god over another or have a different pantheon than the other. And so, just briefly, this is what may make Egypt unique in that it has all these different creation myths, even though you have a whole pantheon of Egyptian gods. And so you have myths like the Heliopolitan myth, Heliopolis. Um, this is where we get the idea of the god Atum or Atum Ra. Um, and here, the story is Atum self-created out of the primordial waters of Nun. And here, uh, from his self-creation, he also created some of the other gods and goddesses. He created Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture. And then Shu and Tefnut gave birth to their own gods and goddesses. Shu and Tefnut gave birth to Geb, earth, and also to Nut, sky. And then finally, out of the primordial waters came that pyramid mound that is called Benben. And out of or from Benben is where a tomb or a tomb Ra was able to finally stand out of the primordial waters and bring life to the gods. And of course, that's represented by the pyramids. Um, and so you had the pyramids as that kind of center of religion, as well as those, final resting places for the pharaohs, who were those intermediaries between the gods and the people. So the pharaohs played a key role in this, which is also unique, especially when we look at the Abrahamic religions and some of the other religions as well. You didn't have the kings playing such a unique role as a kind of semi deity or semi god themselves. Um, Instead, you had the priests, the seers, the oracles who took care of the gods. But in here, you have almost a proto-Roman version of what the Caesar would be. The Caesar's the descendant of the gods or the son of God, you know. Um, Here, though, you have the pharaohs taking on the role of that intermediary. They were no longer human, but in fact, the pharaohs were godlike themselves. And so you have the one creation myth. You have the Hermopolis myth, which some contend is maybe some of the oldest of creation myths. And here you have eight different gods and goddesses called the Ogdode. Um, and they make up these primordial elements of water, darkness, eternity, uh, things that are hidden or air. Uh, and you have this clash of primordial elemental powers of water, darkness, air. Um, these gods and goddesses are represented as frogs or snakes. You have different gods and goddesses really represented as animals, or that half man, half animal, head of a lion or a bull or an ox with the body of a person. So Egypt has this kind of unique um, religious cultural representation of the gods. But in the Hermopolis myth, you have these elemental forces bringing forth again this kind of primordial mound represented in this idea of the pyramid. And where, of course, is this primordial water? The Nile. Everything comes from the Nile. This is the center of life. This is the waters where life comes from. And so the primordial waters of the Nile, out of this comes the earth, the primordial mound. And there, the Hermopolis myth, you actually have two different stories based on the period: Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. Um, some of the oldest actually have that out of this swirling chaos of water and darkness and air and eternity, time itself, infinity itself. Out of these primordial elements comes this primordial mound. And on that mound, a primordial goose lays an egg, and out of that egg is hatched the sun god Ra. And so finally, out of this egg comes Ra. Ra creates light, and from that, the rest of the pantheon is made. Um, in another version, the primordial pyramid is made out of this swirling chaos, and on it, on top of it, is a lotus flower. And once the lotus flower blooms, then that brings forth the sun god Ra, or light, or the sun itself. And from Ra come the rest of the pantheon of other gods. Um, and beyond this, you have other traditions, and one that maybe most closely resembles um, what we would call from the Abrahamic traditions would be the Memphite creation story. And this is where a different god, uh, Ptah, speaks uh, into creation the other gods, the Aeneid, the humanity. And so we're going to dig a little bit closer into the Memphite creation story, just because of its uniqueness and because of some of the poetic similarities it has to later religion. Um, where you have a God speaking things into existence, literally through his thought, through his word, which we don't get in some of the other Egyptian creation myths. But already we can see that the Egyptian creation myths were diverse, totally unique, based on geography and cities. Um, you have different gods entirely. You have different processes in which the gods came about. But then you also have some similarities. The major similarity being the primordial waters. That itself is kind of um, all encompassing. And then the idea of the gods coming forth. You have, the sun god Ra, prominent in most, except for the Memphite theology. Um, and really, where do we get some of this Memphite creation story? Well, it is an old, of course, oral tradition that was eventually written on papyrus, but later in the Middle Kingdom or New Kingdom, but we have some dates there, but we think Middle Kingdom is something that we call the Shabaka stone. And this too is in a museum. You can read it to this day. It's in the hieroglyphs, of course. You can read the translation at the museum. And so I just want to read a few excerpts from the Shabaka stone. Here you have some of the rulers. Yeah, here an actual ruler, Shabaka, who wants to preserve his kingship. And so what he does is he takes this old legend, this old creation story that's on this kind of fraying and old papyri that we think maybe papyri, and he carves it into a stone. Now, we don't have all of it because that stone that was probably at the temple was taken and later used in a millstone, used as a millstone. So the center has been worn away by the grinding of grain through years and years of use and abuse and all that. But much of it has been preserved. And so we have this early Egyptian, thousands and thousands of year old creation story from the Memphite uh, area that we have preserved. And so I'm just going to read a few portions. If you want, you can read the whole thing online. Just look up the Shabaka stone or the Memphite theology or the Memphite creation myth, and you'll get it. But here's a copy um, taken from a text that was translated from a museum there. And so this is just some of the um, copies, of course, in English by Andre Dollinger. All right. Let us just read a few of these excerpts, and you'll see how unique and interesting this is. So it starts the living Horus who prospers the two lands and the two ladies, the golden Horus who prospers the two lands, king of upper and lower Egypt. So what are the two lands? Upper and lower Egypt. The sun god Ra, Shabaka, beloved of Ptah, south of his wall, who lives like Ra forever. Oh, what an introduction. What a name to Shabaka, right? Beloved of Ptah, south of his wall, who lives like Ra forever, right? This writing was copied out anew by His Majesty in the house of his father Ptah. So again, the king, the ruler, Shabaka, is saying that Ptah, That's his father. Um, so, for his majesty found it to be a work of the ancestors, right? So it was already an old creation tradition. Be a work of his ancestors, which was worm eaten, so that it could not be understood from beginning to end. His majesty copied it anew, so that it became better than it had been before, in order that his name might endure, and his monument last in the house of his father, Ptah, south of his wall, throughout eternity, as a work done by the son of Ra Shabaka, for his father, Ptah Tatanen, so that he might live forever. Again, an act of the king of piety. Here, Ptah, I'm going to make a monument. I'm going to carve this in stone. May you welcome me into the afterlife. May I get a kind of, may I ingratiate myself to the gods so that my afterlife goes well. Okay, a little later on, it said this: Geb, Lord of the gods, commanded that the nine gods gather to him. He judged between Horus and Seth. He ended their quarrel. He made Seth the king of Upper Egypt, the land of the upper place, into the place he was born, which is Su. And Geb made Horus king of Lower Egypt, in the land of Lower Egypt, up to the place where his father was drowned, which is the division of the two lands. And uh, uh, referencing, of course, the Nile, drowned in the Nile. Thus, Horus stood over one region, and Seth stood over another region. They made peace over the two lands at Ayan. That was the division of the two lands. Then it goes on uh, this way, and really we're getting down to the creation itself, right? That there was built a royal fortress at the command of Gad, right? And the gods who came into being in Ptah, Ptah, the great on the throne one, Ptah, the father who made a tomb, Ptah, the mother who bore a tomb. Ptah, the great in heart and tongue of the nine gods. Ptah, who bore all the gods. And then it says this: there took shape in the heart, there took shape on the tongue, the form of a tomb. For the very great one is Ptah, who gave life to all the gods and their cause through his heart and through his tongue, in which Horus had taken shape as Ptah, in which Thoth had taken shape as Ptah. Thus, heart and tongue rule over all the limbs in accordance with the teaching that the heart, or he, Ptah, is in every body, and it, the tongue, or he, Ptah, is in every mouth of all the gods, all men, all cattle, all creeping things, whatever lives, thinking whatever it or he wishes, and commanding whatever he wishes. Notice this creation story, that it was first in Ptah's heart, then it was on his tongue, and then there, from the tongue, it took shape of a tomb, right? Literally, uh, through the heart, through the tongue, through this creation process came the God. Notice this, that it goes on. Sight, hearing, breathing, they report to the heart, and it makes every understanding come forth. As to the tongue, it repeats what the heart has devised. Interesting. That's a biblical teaching as well. But just again, see how kind of developed their theology, their religious theology was. What comes out of the tongue? What is first born in the heart. So, what did Ptah, how were the gods first created? Actually, not even in spoken word, not even in the mouth. It was first the heart. The first, a thought in the heart, right? Sight, hearing, breathing, they report to the heart, and it makes every understanding come forth. Interesting, it's not the mind that gives understanding, it is the heart. This is Egyptian theology. Thus, all the gods were born, and his Aeneid was completed. For every word of the God came about through what the heart devised and what the tongue commanded. Thus, all the faculties were made, and all the qualities determined. They that make all foods and all provisions. Through this word, to him who does what is loved, to him who does what is hated. Thus, life is given to the peaceful, and death to the criminal. Thus, all labor, all crafts are made, the action of the hands, the motion of the legs, the movements of the limbs, according to this command, which is devised by the heart and comes forth on the tongue and creates the performance of everything. Thus it is said of Ptah, who made all and created the God, and he is Ta Tenten, who gave birth to the God, and from whom everything came forth. Foods, provisions, divine offerings, all good things. Thus is recognized and understood that he is the mightiest of the gods. Thus, Ptah was satisfied after he had made all things and all divine words. And it says, he gave birth to the gods, made the towns, he placed the gods in their shrines, he settled their offerings, he established their shrines, he made their bodies according to their wishes. Thus, the gods entered into their bodies of every wood, every stone, every clay, everything that grows upon him, in which they came to be. Thus were gathered to him all the gods and their content, united the Lord of the two lands. Interesting theology. What an interesting creation story. Again, you see a few words, Ptah speaks it. He sees that it is good, and then he kind of rests. And so again, some have said that oh, when Genesis comes from the Memphite myth, a creation story. But as we saw before, uh, while there might be a few similarities, there is obvious differences, striking differences as to how creation came about. Certainly, from creation of the gods, rather than the one God speaking all into existence. It is a kind of trickle down effect where the creator God, Ptah, speaks these lesser gods, the Aeneid, the lesser God, uh, lesser gods come forth. But interesting how their theology talks about the heart, the tongue, and then creation of all kind of good things. Um, Now, the second part, just for this Egyptian story, is the destruction of humanity, their own kind of flood myth. Now, the Egyptian flood myth is extremely different than the Mesopotamian flood myth, and we will see that soon. Um, so I have here just really a summary of this from the University of Liverpool, exploring the Egyptian flood myth. That is in your handout, page 14 and 15. And so here is just again a brief look at this flood myth that we have here. And so what is this? Well, first of all, it's not called the flood myth, but rather the myth of the heavenly cow. All right. And you'll see why that is in just a minute. But um, the myth of the heavenly cow tells the near destruction of humanity. um, it was discovered again in the tombs of Ramses the First, Ramses the Second, Seti the First. So different tombs from the Middle Egyptian period, but also though they say it comes from the that seminal form of classical Egyptian. So the ideas or the myth may date as far back to the pyramid texts of the old kingdom. And so, where does this all start? With the rebellion of man. The story begins when the land was ruled by the sun god Ra, the god who created himself. The sun god had reached an old age, and his mortal subjects conspired against him, rebelling against his rule. Then Ra summoned his council in secret, and the gods Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nun, the primordial mothers and fathers who were with him before the world was created. He also summoned his eye, which is a manifestation of his power, and retreated into his council to discuss what should be done about the rebellion of mankind. And so the Council of the Gods suggested that Horus should let his eye go, sending her down in the form of the goddess Hathor to wreak vengeance on the disobedient humans below. With her power, she could smite the evildoers and prevent them from rebelling against his rule again. So here we have maybe some divisions. Some of them say that this turned into three goddesses, um, uh, where they wreaked vengeance. Others say that Hathor turned into the goddess Sekhmet. Others have different variations. For this, we'll go with this tradition, which says that Hathor went down to the humans and wreaked vengeance as the goddess Sekhmet, which is uh, has the body of a woman and the head of a lion. So Sekhmet um, waded into humans, the vengeful lion-headed goddess Sekhmet went in and massacred humans throughout Egypt. However, the massacre was so great and Sekhmet spilled so much of the blood of a people across Egypt that it says that um, Ra then sent messengers who would rush into throughout Egypt, but all they found was waters of red blood. So this is the flood waters, if you will. Now it says this: Ra sent his messengers to Elephantine to bring him red ochre in vast quantities. When the messengers returned, he sent them word that the ochre should be ground up to make red pigment, while servants were to grind barley and make beer. The pigment was then mixed in with the beer, creating the likeness of human blood. In total, 7,000 jars of red beer were made for Sekhmet, vowing to protect the rest of mankind against the wrath of Sekhmet. Ra had the beer brought to the fields, so Sekhmet would arrive there the next morning. During the night, it says, the 7,000 jars were poured over the fields of Egypt, flooding the fields of Egypt. Then the next morning, Sekhmet arrived to see the fields already full of blood, and there she stopped to slake her thirst, and she drunk the 7,000 jars of beer, which she thought was blood. She drank the blood of the fields, the beer of the fields, and then got drunk. Then, in her drunkenness, she finally relented, returning to the other gods, in a sense, sleep it off. Um, In the aftermath, Ra decides to leave the earthly world behind forever and finally ascend to the heavens. The sky then was created in the form of a heavenly cow, the manifestation of the goddess Nut. The other gods joined him, separating themselves from the world of mortals, and in future generations, the Pharaoh would be a human, one who acted as an intermediary between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. The myth of the heavenly cow elucidates the role of Pharaoh, the semi divine emissary who rules the world on behalf of the gods, maintaining Ma'at, balance, and stopping Ifsat, chaos, and ensuring that the gods are properly worshipped. And at the end of the tenure of Pharaoh, at the end of their rule, they would take their place in the realm of the gods. They themselves would be integrated into the divine cosmos. So that is the myth of the heavenly cow, or their flood myth. So again, you see some themes, some elements of um, the sun god Ra being wrathful, then choosing to step back, provide a way out, get um, Sekhmet drunk, and so maybe then she will finally relent, turn away, sleep it off. So he concocts this whole plan to do that, and then finally decides to leave the realm of the humans, the mortals, go to the heavenly realm, bring down the heavenly cow, Pharaoh, to kind of watch over humanity and rule in his place. So the pharaohs are kind of the sons of the sun god Ra. Um, so that is just one myth, but the closest we have to a flood myth is the flooding of the fields and the literal, the blood spilling, the flooding of Egypt. And so this God segment drinking up the flood waters. This is the receding of the waters. Again, a flood myth, but vastly different than Noah and the ark, obviously. But with some elements or themes that we find kind of universally again of a flood that takes place, a God who is angry, and a God who relents. That is all intact. And again, no matter what the geographical location, no matter whether that's Mesopotamia or Egypt, you have a creation myth, you have a flood. And so we wrap up our study of ancient religious belief with the kingdom of Egypt. And I hope that that kind of creation story with the Shakba stone and the flood story of Ra and his wrath upon humanity, um, I hope that that was an interesting take. If you want to know more, just dive into some of the other creation myths. Look in more detail at the myth of the heavenly cow, and we will see you later on in the next class when we get further into what we know as the modern day religions of the Abrahamic religions in their context. You there.